Hello everyone, welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel, and we continue with Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. This is chapter 30a from our father Abraham, and this is Abraham's ninth trial. This one is called Ishmael. Hallelu et Adonai kol goyim, shabechu kol haomim, ki gavar alenu chasdo ve'emet Adonai le'olam, hallelujah. And before we get into this teaching, which is near and dear to, well, it should be to all our hearts, I thought I would open it up from an unbiased opinion, truthful eyes on the ground. The following is an article written by Spanish writer Sebastian Villar Rodriguez and published in a Spanish newspaper on January 15th, 2008. You can look this up. I walked down the street in Barcelona and suddenly discovered a terrible truth. Europe died in Auschwitz. We killed 6 million Jews and replaced them with 20 million Muslims. In Auschwitz, we burned a culture, thought, creativity, talent. We destroyed the chosen people, truly chosen, because they produced great and wonderful people who changed the world. The contribution of this people is felt in all areas of life: science, art, international trade, and above all, as the conscience of the world. These are the people we burned. And under the pretense of tolerance, and because we wanted to prove to ourselves that we were cured of the disease of racism, we opened our gates to 20 million Muslims, who brought us stupidity and ignorance, religious extremism, lack of tolerance, crime, poverty, due to an unwillingness to work and support their families with pride. They have blown up our trains and turned our beautiful Spanish cities into the third world, drowning in filth and crime. Shut up in the apartments they receive free from the government, they plan the murder and destruction of their naive hosts. And thus, in our misery, we have exchanged culture for fanatical hatred, creative skill for destructive skill, intelligence for backwardness and superstition. We have exchanged the pursuit of peace of the Jews of Europe and their talent for a better future for their children, their determined clinging to life because life is holy, for those who pursue death, for people consumed by the desire for death for themselves and others, for our children and for theirs. What a terrible mistake was made by miserable Europe. The ninth trial of Abraham. Ishmael was born with a bow, and he grew up with a bow, as it is said, and God was with the lad, and he grew, and he became an archer. Genesis 21:20. Welcome to the bane of not only Israel's existence, but the bane of the world's existence. And because he is the son of Abraham, God was with him, and God is with him still, as his words came true, saying, Genesis 16:12, and he will be a wild animal of a man, more like pere Adam, a savage of a man. His hand will be upon all, and everyone's hand will be upon him, and before all his brothers he will dwell. When the verse says his hands, it says yadav. Yado bechol v'yad kol bo. In other words, all his hands. That's how it says it in the Hebrew. When the verse says his hands, that is meant that he will use both his hands to fight, kill and consume, steal, and whatever else Ishmael and his descendants have done from his birth until this very day. A bow and arrow requires two hands particularly. A bow and arrow in the desert was designed for hunting, stalking, lurking, and all from a distance, of course. There are several opinions as to why Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says that he was born with a bow. The Maharzu says because Ishmael was born in the sign of the bow, meaning Sagittarius. While the Radal gives the same reasoning we just discussed regarding using both his hands, which is specifically geared towards an archer. He took a bow and arrows and began to shoot at the birds. This is what our text says. Even as a small child, he would shoot his father's birds, pigeons, chickens, and whatnot, like fish in a barrel, which you're not allowed to do, by the way, because If that's how you kill it, then you're not allowed to eat it. It's not kosher. In other words, animal cruelty. Okay, nothing new, really. Now we know that anyone who starts out killing defenseless animals, not for the sake of food, obviously, develops an appetite for murder, right? And people are always what's next on the list after that. So if you ever see anyone kick a defenseless dog, feel free to return the courtesy 100-fold. They have organizations here in Israel that collect cats, dogs, and especially donkeys that have been beaten and abused from Arab villages in Israel. They beat them until they're dead. That's it. They don't look at them as living creatures. Again, there's a value for life that just doesn't exist over there. And really, there are these organizations. We went to a donkey farm. All these cute little donkeys are traumatized because they were all rescued from Arab villages. They just need some donkey love. So if you don't have any respect for life, it never ends with just animals. That's why our sages say there's a very special place in hell for people who abuse animals. Oh boy, you do not want to do that. You want to abuse something defenseless? Wait, you know it comes around, yes? Okay. One time he, Ishmael, saw Isaac sitting by himself, and he shot an arrow at him in order to kill him. This is very reminiscent of Cain and Abel who were alone in the field. Here's what it says in the book of Jasher. And Ishmael, the son of Abraham, was grown up in those days. He was 14 years old when Sarah bare Isaac to Abraham. And God was with Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and he grew up and he learned to use the bow and became an archer. And when Isaac was 5 years old, he was sitting with Ishmael at the door of the tent. And Ishmael came to Isaac and seated himself opposite him. And he took the bow and drew it and put an arrow in it and intended to slay Isaac. So Ishmael genuinely tried to kill Isaac already back then and greatly foreshadowing his behavior in the future. And Sarah saw this, says our text. And Sarah saw this when she told Abraham what Ishmael had done to Isaac. And this is in verse 9. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, making merry. Okay, so what does it say in Hebrew? Vateres Sarah et ben Hagar mitzrit asher yalda lavraham metzachek. Metzachek. Playing around, like litzchok is to laugh. Yitzchak, right? Yitzchak, his name will laugh, right? So metzachek, he was playing around, osetzchok. It's even modern day Hebrew today. In this case, our commentators say that it's bloodshed based. I was just not, I was trying to kill him, but it was as a joke, kind of. So he really tried to accidentally murder him. And when he got busted, he said he was just playing around. It's no big deal, right? And she said to him, Sarah said to Abraham, now stand and write down everything that the Holy One, blessed be He, swore to you and your descendants. In other words, oh yeah, God said this, no problem. Write it down, Abraham, write it down. Specifically, what we can read in chapter 17. Let's go to verse 19. And God said, indeed, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac, v'karata et shmo Yitzchak, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his seed after him. In other words, this is exclusively through Isaac. And regarding Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him exceedingly. He will beget 12 princes, and we can read it at the end of the life of Ishmael. And I will make him into a great nation, indeed. But, says God in chapter 21, my covenant I will establish with Isaac. As in that bond, that's between Isaac, not Ishmael. Be blessed, no problem, because he's coming from you, but through Isaac, whom Sarah bare to you at this time next year. In other words, it's going to be with Sarah, and it's only going to be through Isaac. Then Sarah, so in other words, all these things, and all the promises that God told Abraham in previous chapters as well. Sarah wants him to write it down, write the whole thing down. Then Sarah goes on to say to Abraham, but by your life, as you live, there is no way the son of this handmaiden will share the inheritance with my son Isaac, as it is said in Genesis 21:10. And Sarah said to Abraham, drive out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. Okay. Sarah went on to say to Abraham, It's time for another Hebrew lesson. Let's read the Hebrew in the verse to understand what action was done, okay? Vatomer le'Avraham, and she said, Tomer, Tomar, that's she said too, le'Avraham, to Abraham, Garesh ha'ama hazot, okay? Send her away. Garesh ha'ama hazot, send away this handmaid. The word garesh comes from the word also girushin, divorce. Legaresh is divorce. It also means to shoo away. Before a Jewish couple get married, there is a ketubah that needs to be filled out and signed, right? I'm, my name, my wife's name, or wife-to-be's name, how much I'm giving to her, what I'm giving to her, what I promise her, and so on and so forth. The husband gives to his wife, he gives this to his wife, and this is a legally and spiritually binding document to fulfill everything on there. Now, we've discussed many times how the tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, representing the 24 books in the Torah, the 24 presents that every man should give his wife on her wedding day, right? This represents the ketubah. Moses, who was the best man, right? He was to hand it over to the bride, to Israel. I forget where, but I gave a class on this, but I believe it's in Isaiah, where we read that the bride is to receive the 24 gifts that I just mentioned on her wedding day from the groom, representing the 24 books in the Tanakh. Anyway, when a divorce takes place, you can't just throw someone out on the street. Promises have been made, and the man has obligations and responsibilities. Abraham didn't just sleep with Hagar, chas v'shalom. He married her and promised to take care of her, of course, which is why this entire situation was difficult for him, hence the 9th trial of Abraham. If it wasn't difficult, it would not be a trial. Sarah went on to say to Abraham, Ketov get girushin, write a divorce contract. Would Sarah say something like this if they weren't married to begin with? Of course not. Therefore, they were. But this way, once the divorce contract is written, there are no takebacks. That's it. It's done. Sarah wanted to make sure that she and her son were separated from Hagar, and her son Ishmael. Sarah went on to say to Abraham, write a divorce contract and send away this handmaid and her son from upon me and from my son. But wait, she doesn't stop there. From this world and from the world to come. Whoa, you think this is harsh? God didn't think so. First of all, there is a reason this is a trial, specifically because it seems harsh. And second, God was the one who told Abraham to listen to Sarah and to do everything that she tells him. We know this. This is in the text. Sarah saw what Abraham, the very embodiment of chesed in this world, could not see in this case. We're going to hear this time and again, and the sages confirm Sarah was on a higher spiritual level than Abraham. Sarah received higher levels of prophecy than Abraham. So we're learning how great Abraham was, right? Sarah. Okay? All right. Sarah saw what Abraham could not. And again, Abraham is the embodiment of chesed. Ask him to send his son away, even if it's Ishmael. He loved him, right? Hagar was after Sarah's position as mistress, and Ishmael was literally trying to murder Isaac. That within itself warrants the death penalty, but don't worry, Ishmael will get his. Nevertheless, our text continues. After all the hardships that have come upon Abraham, this particular matter was bad and most difficult in his eyes, meaning from all the hardships that he had faced thus far. And we're going to see why. This is the 9th trial. We know what the 10th trial is. That was the trial. So this is the one right before that. As is said in Genesis 21:11, but the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son, meaning that I got to send away Ishmael. Hadavar vayira hadavar me'od, very much it was bad how Abraham viewed this. The Torah gives us Abraham's perspective in this verse. It doesn't say Ishmael. Let's read it again. But the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son. Those are the words that the Torah uses. So it doesn't say Ishmael, because the reader, knowing the story, can easily understand why you would want to remove this guy not only from the house of Abraham, but from the world entirely. Look at the world today. Look at what Ishmael is doing in the world today, and all the harm that Ishmael has caused in the world today over the last few thousand years. Not the point. This evil was not only apparent back then, but throughout history, as the world suffers from Ishmael to this very day, no matter where he is in the world. There's no conforming to your adoptive country. Of course not. It is your host country that must adapt to you. Otherwise, you will burn it to the ground, just like you did your country of origin, which is why you are no longer there. You don't see Muslims immigrating to other Muslim countries now, do you? No, they go to first world countries and want to turn it into third world countries. Just look around. Tell me that what I'm saying is untrue, please. These places where they come from, these are oppressive hellholes, so they leave there, but then they do what they do back there in the new places. So let's bring them all over to us, where surely they will be grateful for the hospitality and become fully functioning and contributing members of society. Oh, wait, no, that's not happening. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a few good ones, sure. And if there are probably even many good ones. It's always the very vocal minority that ruins it for everyone, okay? Not just in this case, but across the globe. Now, again, okay, hold on. Let me continue here, just so you understand. When I lived in Brooklyn, I was in Brooklyn from 2001 to 2010. Right off of Avenue J, you had a mix. One store was like a Muslim store. The other store was Orthodox Jews, all throughout the block. And guess what? Everyone got along. There were no problems. Everyone was walking down the street. You got Muslims, you got Orthodox Jews. No problem. There was peace, right? Now, I don't know how it is right now, but, it's been a minute. But still, people just want to be able to live their lives at the end of the day. Wonderful. Everybody wants to live their lives at the end of the day. Well, almost everybody. So please understand, when I speak the way I do about Ishmael, I'm not speaking of the general public, but of the lowlives who rape and murder and steal and blow themselves up and send their children to kill. All these things, right? Or eventually just get away with it. This is who I'm talking about. That is that spirit of Ishmael. If you think about it, at least 50% of the Jews that are here in Israel are actually Arabs. They come from Persia, they come from Iraq, they come from Syria, they come from Lebanon, they come from Egypt, they come from all the Arab countries, they come from Yemen, and here they are, Orthodox Jews. So are they technically Arabs? They come from Arab countries, but their faith is in the Torah, you see. So, and by the way, the most warm and loving people, like I said, I don't pray in the Ashkenazi minyan, I pray in the Sephardi minyan, and Edot HaMizrach, what do you call it? The tribes of the East. That's what they're called. I'm the whitest guy there, okay? Why do I pray there? Because these guys are warm, loving, and accepting. So when I say this, when I speak this way, please, I'm speaking of the spirit of Ishmael. And you can call it out and you could see what it is and where it is. That's who I'm speaking of. I'm not, okay? You get this, please. Okay. So, I kept on going off on that. Okay, so let's not get started in the organizations and the politicians that protect them and everything. We won't go there. Just know that, like I said, that's who I'm talking about. Though that specific spirit. But the matter greatly, so we're continuing. But the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son. Abraham didn't see the monster that he was, or the one that he would become. He only saw him as a son. But Sarah did see, as she could, because she wasn't in it like he was. He wasn't her son. Okay, so Abraham was naturally and understandably in turmoil over this. He knows God's promise, and it doesn't involve Ishmael to continue his covenant. God said Ishmael will be taken care of. I will bless him and multiply him. There will be great nations and 12 princes, just like we got 12 princes, right? And he knows his wife can see more than he can, as she was on a higher spiritual level than him. So Abraham knows these things. He knows she's not lying, right? Even the most righteous, the absolute best of us, can get clouded when it comes to emotion, especially when it comes to our offspring, to our kids. And as we know, this was nothing compared to what he was going to go through next with Isaac. This was his toughest trial up until that point. Here, he just had to send him away, right? We know. Rabbi Yehuda says, that very night, the Holy One, blessed be he, appeared to our father Abraham. Appeared to our father Abraham that same night and told him, Abraham, do you not know that Sarah has been given to you as a wife since she was in her mother's womb? She is your companion and the wife of your youth. Hagar is not called your wife, nor is Sarah called your handmaid, as said in 17:19. And God said, indeed, your wife Sarah will bear you a son. God could have just said, Sarah will bear you a son. But God, in his infinite wisdom, said, your wife Sarah. So there will be no question. God continues, Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, but Hagar is not called your wife, rather your handmaid. Chapter 16, we can read the following. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's handmaid. Where are you coming from? The angel of the Lord said this. And where are you going? And she said, from before Sarai, my mistress, I am fleeing. And the angel of the Lord said, return to your mistress. The angel of the Lord calls Hagar handmaid and Sarai mistress. And even Hagar calls Sarai her mistress. So there should be no confusion whatsoever from the side of God directly, from the side of the angel, from the side of Abraham, from the side of Sarah and Hagar. We are all in agreement over here. All parties are very clear on their position, both in heaven and on earth. God continues. And everything that Sarah had spoken, she spoke the truth, says God to Abraham. Meaning, you better believe her when she said that Ishmael indeed tried to kill Isaac. But do not be dismayed regarding the lad and your handmaid, as said in 21:12. And God said to Abraham, be not dismayed concerning the land and concerning your handmaid. Whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice, for in Isaac will be called your seed. Now, let's ask a question. What exactly was displeasing to Abraham? What was his main concern here? I know what comes up right away, but let's broaden our horizons. Everything concerns him at this point. And there is a reason for concern. But let's get behind the eyes and thoughts and understanding of Abraham so we can better understand the man, because this is a guy we want to emulate, right? Here are the concerns. And which one is the biggest one? Is it that he has to send away Hagar and Ishmael? In the verse we just read, God doesn't refer to either of them by name, but rather the lad and your handmaid. Okay? In other words, God's downplaying this. Is it that Ishmael tried to kill Isaac? I mean, that's a big one right there, right? This, of course, is definitely cause for concern, as he knows that he can't possibly keep him around after that. Or is it the fact that Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, not through Sarah, but the firstborn son of Abraham, has completely fallen away from his father's teachings and forsaken his God? Abraham, that's the one. They all already knew that in order for Isaac to not only receive the godly inheritance from his father, but to live perhaps another day in order to fulfill his calling, dependent upon the expulsion of his son. And if this is how the son of Abraham behaves in his own house, in his own house, how do you think he's going to behave on his own after receiving God's blessings without anyone to curb his enthusiasm? He will be a savage of a man. He is a savage of a man, just like the angel of the Lord said he would be. And if there is no place for a man like this in the tent of Abraham, then there is no place for him in the house of God. Which is exactly why Ishmael built his house on top of the place where God's house was and will be built. Remember, this is a trial for a reason. You know your son has gone off the path and will cause tremendous turmoil to the world in general and your chosen son in particular, and there is nothing that you can do for him. It's called free will. We all make our choices. We all have to live with them, and you reap what you sow. You absolutely do. Everything, every small little thing that you do or don't do will come back to you, and you will have to explain yourself. God promised Ishmael abundance in this world, and that's exactly what Ishmael has received, as all their wealth comes from the ground, not because of anything they made up or any ingenuity or any making the world a better place. It comes from the ground. Yeah. And as we have said many times, instead of actually helping the world and making it a better place, which is what they absolutely can do, likely should do, they have the power and wealth to do, thereby perhaps redeeming themselves in the eyes of God. What do instead? They build towers for themselves and create islands, buy expensive things because they are expensive, and bribe world leaders. And so, when this life is over for them, it's over. That's it. This world and the world to come. You understand now why this matter was the most difficult thing for Abraham thus far in his life, out of all the hardships that he went through? The later the trial that we have, the more difficult it is. But the more difficult the trial, the stronger the individual who faces it. So Abraham was ascending, as were his trials equally. This is how we go in life. Now, despite all this pain that Abraham is facing, and we know that God appeared to him that night, what does the man who loves God do? Abraham arose early the next morning and wrote a get Gilshin, divorce papers. Question: why did Abraham not give her the papers and send her away that night? Abraham waited till morning specifically. Now, these things didn't necessarily happen when Sarah spoke to Abraham and Ishmael tried to kill Isaac. It wasn't necessarily all on the same day. It could have been after a while, right? But the night that God appeared to him, why did Abraham not wake up and then, okay, listen, get out of here right now? Abraham waited till morning. Specifically, he waited till morning. Why? First of all, morning is the time of Abraham. We know that. Okay? Morning is his time. It is the time of chesed. It is the time of mercy. And you do not shoo anyone away at night where the judgments are strongest. And also, for similar reasons, you do not hand someone divorce papers at night either. Did you know that? Because you need to be clear-minded when you do so, and they need to be clear-minded when they receive it. That's why these things are not done at night. Erev, when there is irbuv, confusion, and boker, where there's clarity, efshar levaker, where you can inspect. Okay, so this is so much more relevant than the time of day. I hope you see that, right? This is dark and this is light. So Abraham wrote them and gave them to her, and he sent her away from upon him and from Isaac his son, from this world and from the world to come, as said in Genesis 21:14. And Abraham arose early in the morning. Still arose early in the morning, just like he said. And Abraham rose early in the morning, and he put the saddle on his donkey, right in chapter 22. Same thing. God tells you, Early in the morning, let's go. And Abraham arose early in the morning, and he took the bread and the leather pouch of water, like the thermos or something, the flask, and he gave them to Hagar, and he placed them on her shoulder, and the child, and he sent her away. It did the way it's written in Hebrew. Like if you read it in English, it'd be like he placed the child. He was 24 years old at the time. He didn't place her on any shoulder, or is he 27 years old? Anyway, we'll find that out in a second. She didn't carry Ishmael. Placed the flask on her shoulder, and along with the child, and he sent her away, and she went away and wandered in the deserts of Beersheba. Now, let's read this just for a second in Hebrew, because I need you to hear a word over here, and I need this for the rest of this study. Vayashkem Avraham b'boker, vayikach lechem v'chemat mayim, vayten el Hagar, sam al shichma ve'et hayeled vayishalechea, vatelech vateta bemidbar Beersheba. This word, vateta, this is what I want you to hear. The one that's translated as wandered. We'll get into it in a minute, but it's not what it means. Okay, so remember that. The word is vateta. What did she do in the deserts of Beersheba? And so Abraham sent her away with divorce papers and took the dardur. The Radal says that it's a type of, what is this dardur? It says it's a type of woman's garment, or a garment, something specifically for a woman, but we can understand that it was a specific kind of rope. Okay? And he tied it around her waist. This rope was a sign of a handmaid. Now the question our sages bring up is why? Why did Abraham mark her as a handmaid after he divorced her and sent her away? Because he did exactly what Sarah told him to do, along with God's approval. So now, she's no longer his wife, but she still remains a handmaid. And he wanted this by design. What does our text say? And he tied it around her waist so he could check up on her, and so all who would know that she is a handmaid. Not just anyone's handmaid. She was the handmaid of Abraham, the man of God, the most popular man in the world. This way, people wouldn't mess with her, and they would be able to get set up easily wherever they went. Nobody would really give them trouble. In addition to the blessings that Ishmael received already because he was the son of Abraham, they were going to be fine. So this dardor, which was tied around her waist, was dragging behind her on the floor. It was long and it would drag behind her floor. Remember, she's walking in the desert, leaving marks in the sand. And this would leave a pathway to where she walked. Our text continues, and even more so, Abraham wanted to see Ishmael, his son, and see the way that they were going. This way he was able to follow them also from a distance by simply tracking them. So he could see the markings in the sand and watch them really from a distance without seeing them necessarily, and also without being seen. This is more about Ishmael than it is about Hagar, though. In the merit of Abraham, the water from the thermos or from the flask never ran out. Now, hold on. If you're thinking about what's written in the Torah, you should be raising your eyebrow right now, because we know what would eventually happen. They would almost die of thirst later on. So what's happening here? Okay, so here we go. There are many things that can stop chesed from reaching you. Chesed is like a faucet. The only one that turns off this faucet is us. You turn off your faucet, and I turn off mine. That's it. God constantly gives. If you look at the world of nature, rain, dew, bugs, trees, animals, everything and everyone is fed. It's beautiful. Everything works perfectly. Nobody goes hungry. And if something goes hungry, it is to be food for something else. No one goes hungry. That is the circle of life, if you will, in nature. So why is it so difficult for us? Because the animals in nature are doing exactly what they need to do. We are not. That's how simple this is. So if you live properly, the faucet remains open. If you don't, you are now closing the faucet. God's like, I'm not giving it to you. You are shutting yourself off. That's how this works. That is the basic principle. So, there are many things that we can do to stop the chesed from reaching you. Even if the man of chesed himself, even if Abraham blesses you. And since she arrived in the wilderness, she began to go astray after the idolatry of her father's house. And forthwith the water from the bottle was spent, as it is said in 21:15. And the water was depleted from the leather pouch, and she cast the child under one of the bushes. Vayichlu hamayim min hachemet, vatashlechet hayeled tachat achad hasichim. This is further proof that hearts were not pure over here. The moment you leave the house of Abraham, you go back to idolatry. I mean, right? Now, was Ishmael a child that she had to toss him under the bushes, or like we said before, carry him? What does our text say? Ishmael was 24 years old at the time when he left the house of Abraham, and Isaac was 10 years old. He's 14 years older than him. Now, there are different opinions as to what exact ages they were, but we know that Ishmael was 14 years old and Isaac, so 24 years old. The book of Jasher says he was 27 years old. It doesn't really matter that much. So we discussed in previous teachings that this we're talking about the higamel. So that's why he was 13 and 27 years old. That's why, because we use the word higamel. We discussed in previous teachings, higamel is hey gimel, 8 mal. The second half of the word is when he was circumcised on the 8th day. So it fits the 8 days when Abraham had the party. The other opinion from the same word, which is the root of gmilah in modern day Hebrew, it means to rehabilitate, right? A rehab center is called machon gmilah. If you Google translate that word, you'll get the following: weaning, off milk, rewarding, gmilut chasadim, and maturing. Because, why in this case? Because he was 13 and was rehabilitated, Isaac, meaning he was rehabilitated free from the evil inclination. So it very well likely could have been that Isaac was 13 and Ishmael was 27. But like we said, that doesn't really matter to our story, but I had to bring it up because it's written in the text. Either way, it doesn't change our story over here, but it's important that we know these opinions. It's part of the 70 faces of Torah. Now, let's get back to the word we mentioned earlier, vateta, where she departed and wandered, as said in verse 14. Vatelech, she wandered, she walked, vateta. What does this mean? And we also discussed this before. Ein vateta, ela avodah zarah. Vateta only means idolatry, as said in Jeremiah 15:10. Hevel hema ma'aseh ta'atuim be'et pkudatam yoavedu. They are vanity, a work of delusion. At the time of their visitation, they shall perish. Simply put, idolatry is work of delusion. Wouldn't you agree? As a result of Hagar returning to her idolatry, the flask of water dried up. Again, Abraham blessed them. That flask would have been gone forever, because that's what he could do. But if you go to idolatry, you're the ones that stop the blessing. It dried up as we continue with our text, and the nefesh, the body of Ishmael, was fatigued from thirst, so he went and threw himself beneath the thorns of the wilderness. The Torah always gets to the bottom line, but the Midrash gives us a backstory. Watch. Genesis 21:15 says, and the water was depleted from the leather pouch, hachemet, it's like a leather pouch, and she cast the child under one of the bushes. Okay, let's break this down. And the water was depleted from the leather pouch because she worshipped idols, and she cast the child, as he was either a 24 or 27-year-old man. She didn't physically cast anything. Nevertheless, she told him to sit and wait under the bushes as she continued on, because he was more exhausted than she was. And under one of the bushes, Ishmael saw thorn bushes from a distance that gave more shade of where she initially told him to stay, and then he crawled over there, which is why our text says thorns as opposed to bushes. So then verse 16 says, And she went and sat down from afar at about a distance of 2 bow shots. Mirchak kemitvachei keshet, again alluding to Ishmael. For she said, "Let me not see the child's death." And she sat from afar, and she raised her voice and wept. She wept, yes. But did she pray to God? No. Right? We know this by how she is then answered. The bottom line is this. It was Hagar's deeds that got Ishmael thrown under the bushes. And it was Ishmael's deeds that got them both thrown out of the house of Abraham to begin with. Okay, a winning duo indeed. And so, a person can live like a crook, idolatry, attempted murder, robbery, rape, and oh yes, Ishmael was guilty of all these things already when he was in the house of Abraham. Nevertheless, take a lowlife and bring them a few moments away from death and see what happens. And Ishmael said, "Master of the worlds, if you have any desire before you to water me, then please do so, and I will not die of thirst." Look who's turning to God right now. What Ishmael is saying here is either give me water or just make it quick, but don't let me die of thirst. This is a great prayer. I'm joking. As he continues in our text saying, because dying of thirst is the most excruciating of all deaths. How is this the case? The Radal shows us that in the wilderness, when there was no food, Israel complained. But when there was no water, they actually fought physically. And so dying of thirst is a lot worse. And the Holy One, blessed be He, heard his prayer, as said in 21:17, and God heard the lad's voice. And an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, said to her, "What is troubling you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the lad's voice in the place where he is." Not Hagar's voice, the lad's voice, specifically wherever he is, right? Look what our sages constitute as a prayer. He said, either save me or kill me, but make it quick. Not much of a prayer at all, especially when your life depends on it. But as wicked as he was still the son of Abraham. So he had God's ear. And when a son of Abraham, but recognizes the Creator, and we are all sons and daughters of Abraham, when we but recognize the Creator and give full acknowledgement that his life or his death is in God's hands, God hears and answers favorably, as God already told Hagar before his birth that his name would be Ishmael. Ishma will hear El, God. God will hear when he calls out, because he will. A whole bunch of them Allahu Akbars going on. Allahu Akbar is not a bad thing. It just means God is great. So Allahu Akbar, right? They just, you associate that, you hear Allahu Akbar, and then something explodes. God will hear this child's voice. But again, look what they're doing in the name of God, right? Where have we seen this before? The other ones, right? Okay, so God will hear this child's voice. And again, not because of him, not because he's righteous, but because of who his father is, did God answer him. He's not a good guy. Okay, we know this. This was told to her in the wilderness, and it happened in the wilderness. The first time in the wilderness and the second time in the wilderness. As we see the second part of the verse, for God has heard the lad's voice in the place where he is. Why from wherever he is? Because she left him under the bushes, but he moved to the thorns, and she didn't know where to find him, which is why she wept. She actually was looking, she couldn't find him. She was 2 bow shots away from where he actually was, because he went to a different place. But not only that, God will hear his voice from wherever he may be in the future. That's what that also means. One thing I can say about Muslims is when it is time to pray, and for them it's 5 times a day, they stop whatever they're doing, wherever they're going, they take out their rugs or their carpets, be it in the streets, sidewalk, parking lots, airports, wherever. See, in New York, they'll stop their cab at the side of the road, take out the carpets, get down, and do the Allahu Akbars. God hears their voice in their place wherever they may be. Prophecy fulfilled till this very day. And this, when you have people praying 5 times a day with no shame, you think God's not going to answer them? Of course he will. If only we had that kind of courage. And it was right in the place of Hagar that the well opened its mouth. Why where she was and not where he was? Because he was moments away from death. He couldn't move anymore. And so in verse 18 it says, "Rise up, pick up the lad and grasp your hand upon him, for I shall make him into a great nation." In other words, he's about to die. You're not. Go and get him. You need to help him, and the angel of the Lord will carry him. Right? You need to start going there. You'll go there, and then he'll carry him. Don't worry about it. Our text also says that this well was created on the Sabbath eve before sunset. And we've learned about this in earlier teachings. This is one of the 10 things that God created at that time, before sunset, before going into Shabbat. And this will also explain the following verse, verse 19. "And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled a pouch with water and gave to the lad to drink." So she filled it up with water. She ran to Ishmael. She gave him the water. He's getting his strength back, and then they both went over to the well. This well had already existed. God opened her eyes, meaning it was right there, but she couldn't see it. The well had already existed, and it was right where she was, but she could not see it. This is the well of Abraham in Be'er-Sheva. She was in the wilderness of Be'er-Sheva. Read this chapter and see how many times it says Be'er-Sheva or Be'er-Shava. This was then Isaac's well, and he called it Be'er-Sheva. This same well followed Jacob around wherever he went. But why could Hagar not see it? Why can you not see your salvation right in front of you? Because idolatry. Plain, you are going to die. Your answers are right in front of you. This will save your life. But you cannot see it because idolatry. So she was saved, not on her own merit, not even on his merit, because of Abraham. Look around the world today and notice how idolaters who are convinced that they hear God speaking to them are not aware of what is right in front of their faces. They worship idols as God and cannot see the truth. You cannot. It is impossible. And so God did not answer her, but the one who recognized him. And again, not even on his own merit. Which is why she was tasked with taking care of him, because it was in his merit and ultimately the merit of Abraham that she was saved. And they went and drank and filled the flask and left the well. Now she understood that as long as she keeps with her idols, they're going to die. End of story. So it would be wise, at least until they get settled, right, to not continue with old habits. From there, they carried their legs and walked throughout the entire wilderness until they reached the desert of Paran, where they found more water. As said in 21:20-21, "And God was with the lad, and he grew, and he dwelt in the desert, and he became an archer. Born with the bow, lived with the bow. And he dwelt in the desert of Paran." So that's where they were. And yes, this is the same wilderness of Paran that the children of Israel dwelt in over the 40 years from the Exodus from Egypt. And you will also notice that once they reach that point, they no longer need water, for there is water there in abundance. And this was the base camp of Ishmael, south of Beersheba, close to Egypt. And that's our class for today. I know it stops in the middle, but again, these are long chapters, and next one's going to be even longer than this one. It's going to be, you're not going to want to miss this one. In any case, so stay tuned for part 2 and the conclusion of Ishmael, along with prophecies of from 2,000 years ago, exactly where Ishmael would be and what he would do in the latter days, and you will see God's word is true. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and have a Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.